All right, good evening. How's everybody doing? Well, we'll try to give a few people a chance to join us. It's 6:30 now, and understandably, with the rather late notice, might take a few people to a few minutes to get in. But that said, if anybody has questions that they'd like to kick us off with, now would be a good time to ask them. We will cover a lot of ground once we get once we get going, but now's a good time to ask on the kind of more personal stuff. Not sure. So we will be having sessions like this every Wednesday, give or take. There may be very rare occasions where I might cancel a session for various reasons. These are optional. You're free to attend or not attend. I have done various ones where I was the only one in the room talking to the camera. But I post them after we're done. There's a lot lost if you don't attend. You're not able to ask questions, you're not able to engage with the material. But that said, you won't lose anything if you don't attend the sessions. So not something to stress out about, but if you can, they are valuable. They are valuable. All right, so I'm going to give everybody about three to 5 more minutes. See what we see. If all goes well, we'll have a few more. I don't know what to say. If not, then it'll just be us. So is anyone here with the Paul DeCamp campus? Are we in serious, we're not going to talk to you method mode tonight? That's right. I love the sound of my own voice. I'm happy to fill the space. Glad to see somebody's face. One of the challenges with online teaching is that it's very difficult to make a connection with students like you do on ground. It's not to say that it's impossible or that you can't get the information, etc., but it does change the dynamic quite a bit, especially for you. For me, this is my kind of area of expertise. Online instruction is my bread and butter, but still kind of nice to get to know students and have an understanding of strengths and weaknesses, level of participation, level of involvement, level of investment in the various courses. Ethics is a particularly interesting one in the sense that of the various disciplines, subjects, even in the case, pieces of a subject. Ethics is one of the ones that, unlike a lot of humanities, is actually applicable to real life. So I have that as an advantage when it comes to these kinds of trainings and teaching this particular class. So I'm hopeful that everybody walks out of here with a little something that they can use in the future. But I think we're going to go ahead and get started. As far as an agenda for tonight, I'd like to start with a solid discussion on expectations, what it is that that I expect from you, what it is that the class is all about, what the different assignments are, and etc. That kind of thing. So starting with that, as a 200 level community college course, this runs a little bit differently than my standard version. So this is ever so slightly abbreviated as far as workload class, but because of that, I have much higher expectations for the discussion forum. So the 2 assignments that you have to deal with on the week is you have an initial primary post that you have to do in the discussion forum, and then an annotated bibliography, which is a research assignment, and then 2 replies at a minimum to your classmates in the discussion forums. Now the key of the discussion forums is not just writing, right? It's not an essay. You're not using the discussion forums to, for lack of a better term, prove understanding or as a test to kind of see whether you understand or not. That's part of it, but it's not so much that's not what you're being graded on. Let's put it that way. What you're being graded on is investment. How much of the material have you actually taken on board, understood enough that you can find application for it? And then there's also a little bit that comes down to kind of learning philosophy. So for the vast majority of you, this is probably going to be your very first philosophy class. Ethics should not be your first philosophy class. There are at least 2 classes that at I don't want to degrade a community college, because especially both Paul de Camp and Eastern Shore, both are just powerful tools for improving your life. But at a more established 4-year university, you would have a Philosophy 101 class, an introductory course. In that course, you would learn about things like the general history of philosophy, some of the language. Philosophy has its own lingo, it has its own vocabulary. You would learn basic argument structure. You would learn that an argument is a technical term that has nothing to do with those bouts around the dinner table. It has to do with presenting a point in a logical way using structure and logic and reasoning. So you would learn a little bit about that. You would learn about fallacies, how to avoid certain fallacies in your writing and in your arguments. We learn what philosophy is all about. What is it that philosophy is supposed to do? How is it different from psychology, sociology, any of the other humanities, anthropology, all of which had their start as philosophy. For that matter, physics, mathematics, astronomy, all had their start as philosophy. It seems like when philosophy wins, it sort of loses. every time that philosophy figures something out, that we learn something solid, it's not philosophy anymore, because that's what philosophy is all about, is trying to kind of discover the route to learning something for real. And in so doing, those tend to become their own disciplines at that point, because we've sort of figured out what it is that we're trying to accomplish. So something like psychology for a very long time was just philosophy. Even physics was just philosophy. And then we figured out, hey, this actually has something that we can apply scientific principles to, or it has other applications outside of just logic and reasoning. And then we apply science to it, and it becomes its own thing. So philosophy is about if you will, discovering disciplines. But it's also about a lot more. It's about asking questions. It's about critical thinking. It's about asking the right kinds of questions in the right kinds of ways, and then evaluating them in a way that sort of brings everything to a head. It's also about asking questions that seem obvious. So you might think you know that it's going to, that the sun's going to rise tomorrow. It's risen every day since the last time, or since the day you were born, and for as long as recorded history can imagine. But one of the questions in philosophy is, why do we think that we know that the sun's going to rise tomorrow? We don't know. It's a prediction. We're making a prediction. It's an educated guess. We feel pretty solid. We've got science on our side, all of these other kinds of things, but we don't know anything about the future. So challenging basic assumptions, challenging beliefs, kind of holding those up to the light and really seeing where they came from, those are all parts and parcel of philosophy. So that's what we're going to be doing in this class, without all of that preamble that normally comes from a Philosophy 101 class. So I'm going to be interweaving a lot of Philosophy 101 concepts into the course. That's a good question. If you have speakers or headphones, you have to make sure that they are set up in Zoom. And because I'm in this window right now, I can't guide you through that. Though I believe there is a way that you can do it through where you should see in the corner a little, I'm talking and you're telling me you can't understand me. Just a second, I had a question from a student who is having trouble hearing. All right. So no Philosophy 101, but we're going to try and feed that in through the course. Now, that's going to have ramifications if you transfer. Not into the world ramifications, but ramifications all the same. So if you do end up transferring to a four-year university, which I hope all of you will, you're going to want to kind of back up your philosophy background if you intend to use this as a transfer course, okay? That may include taking a Philosophy 101 course when you get there. That said, you'll have a lot of what I've integrated into this course will help prepare you for that, and you should be in pretty good shape. You won't be going in too blind. That said, I don't recommend taking this course and then trying to jump into a 300 or 400 level course as you go into your 4-year university, okay? There is a second class that you're missing out on, and that is a basic critical thinking class. Now, some of you may have taken that through if you're Eastern Shore, have taken that through the English department. If you have taken it through the English department, there's a kind of class that sort of adds that in. Then that gives you at least a little bit of grounding on critical thinking. Yeah?
Hello?
Hi, how you doing, Yasmin?
Good, how are you?
Good. Finally, somebody is willing to speak up. Been talking to an empty room. Welcome. You haven't missed much. I've just been basically going through what kinds of things we're going to be studying for the term. I haven't really gone into expectations too much yet. So bear with me. Anyway, I was speaking about the fact that this particular ethics course comes at you early compared to a lot of programs. A lot of programs will focus on getting you through a couple of other philosophy courses first. But like I said, I integrate a lot of philosophy 101 and a lot of logic and rhetoric into the course. You'll see it in the discussion. Note that the discussions have a 3-part requirement, if you will. The initial post that you have to make. The initial post should be conversational. It's not an essay, okay? It should be conversational. You're trying to make a point, okay? Got about 15 minutes. The replies that you're required to do are meant to be conversation, right? You're not going onto the board and being like, oh, I agree, this was a great point. Thank you so much for posting that. I feel so much better. I know everything so much better now. That's not what it's for, right? You need to add something substantive. You won't get any credit, not even partial credit, for an I agree post. Just kind of lay that out there now. I agree posts are kind of one of my pet peeves. Philosophy is all about discussion, a concept called the dialectic. It works through conversation. It works through interaction with other people. Think of it this way. If you've ever heard of the concept of a sounding board, I've got an idea, I'd like to run it by you. And you talk to somebody about your idea. Why do we do that? It's because ideas in our head feel, look, and behave differently than they do when we have to actually apply them. Okay? So the act of actually trying to make a point to someone else, what we call transferring knowledge, right? Making that point is fundamental to actually examining our beliefs and ideas, right? There's too much of your whole life experience sitting inside your head that makes all your ideas sound amazing when they stay inside your head. It's not until you try to vocalize them, or in this case, type them out, that you start seeing the holes, right? So type them out. I'm not looking for an essay. I'm not looking for absolute understanding. If you are using text, a document or a video or whatever, if you're using something to sort of help you make your point, then yes, you need a citation for that. But otherwise, it's a conversation, all right? So make your statement if you feel pretty good about it. But kind of go with your first run in the same way that you would if you were having a conversation with somebody. If you were having a conversation with somebody, it's not like you get to it like, wait, stop, I need to go look this up really quick or something like that. You're just going to put it out. I am looking for readability and understandability, but I'm not looking for things like grammar, right? I'm not looking for structure or paragraph. Like, just make it understandable, make it readable. If we can do that, and there's room for other people to come in and have a say, then you've done yourself and everybody else a service. Now, that said, don't flaw your argument on purpose. You're trying to make a point. Sometimes you're taking a position different from your own. Sometimes you're kind of articulating your own position, how you feel about a particular thing. Either way, don't hamstring yourself. Put it out there put your best face forward. This becomes really obvious as the class progresses. You start to see how certain people think and react to certain sorts of things. So, don't make yourself out to be the bad guy or anything like that. There will be times where you're going to take a devil's advocate position, taking a position just for the purpose of moving the conversation forward. That's cool, but do it to the best of your ability.
Right.
Don't do it in a way that, like, somebody's going to just come in and crush it.
Yeah.
Let so many openings. Do it to the best of your ability. All right, so that's the kind of key to discussion, right? The discussion is where I get to know you. It's where we do a lot of our interaction. These sessions is where I get the most interaction with you. If we can regulate, this is an interesting term because, or semester I should say, because we have a mixed college classrooms. Some of you are from Fall Camp and some of you are from Eastern Shore. And having both of your classes kind of mixed like this is interesting for me. I'm interested to see how it goes. But that does mean that there's going to be opportunities for you to when you happen across them in the university. I do tend, at least in previous semesters, I've tried to visit the campus at Eastern Shore a couple times over the course of the semester. Can't promise that I'll do that this semester. It's kind of a pain in the butt to do. So I'm coming from Yorktown. And I have now a couple of live classes that I'm doing at Thomas Nelson. So it's going to be a little more difficult for me to find a day where I can just take a whole day and come out to Eastern Shore. Fall to Camp, not quite as bad a drive. I might be able to make it out there at least once, but we'll see. It depends on if that's something that's everyone finds value in. Last semester it was great. I had quite a few students who would join, and we would sit in a little student union area and kind of chat it up for the day on topics within and not within the class. It was great. But that said, these sessions every Wednesday are going to be the best place to kind of ask your questions and have a chance to sort of interact with the material in such a way, and with me in such a way, to expand your own research and the lecture notes and videos and whatnot. But the discussion is where that is really going to happen as far as your scholarship goes, right? There are two directions for your two different assignments. Now, the one thing that you don't have to deal with is you don't have an essay in this class. If this was a four-year class, or a four-year university class, which would normally be a 200 level or 300 level course, there would be a weekly essay that went alongside your bibliography. I don't have you guys do that. It's a conscious decision on my part, but like I said, because of that, I expect a lot more out of the discussions and with our interactions, right? So, but the knowing that you just don't have access to Philosophy 101 and logic courses I don't feel comfortable in kind of forcing you to do both the research and the writing and the discussion all in an individual week. It's just too much. So no essays. Thank me now. But the research requirement is.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. What you're doing with your annotated bibliography is not a throwaway assignment, okay? This is a research class. You're learning, part of what you're learning here is not just ethics and not just philosophy, but also research and citation, the format, if you will, style. Both universities focus on APA formatting. If you use MLA formatting, I'm not going to kill you for it. You're not going to lose points or something like that. But I'm going to tell you now, don't. You should learn how to use the APA style. If you already know MLA, then the transition will be much easier than for someone who's learning from scratch. If you don't know style at all, if you've never dealt with it or messed with it at all, go to the library. Take the time to sit down with one of the resource officers there, or resource librarians there. Have them give you a crash course. The Purdue OWL is a really useful tool, but if you have no concept of what you're doing, the Purdue OWL can be a weighty, it's a burden, right? If you kind of have an idea what the terminology is and whatnot, then following the Purdue OWL is super slick. You have no problems. It's one of the best resources I've ever seen for formatting. Why is formatting important? Well, part of that comes from the research. When you're doing research specifically on a topic in philosophy where you don't have empirical evidence, the only thing that you have available to you is the conversation that has been had before you, right? So every writing that has been done on philosophy, every lecture, every conversation, all of that is building on what came before it. That's what philosophy is all about. Philosophy is finding your place in the great conversation. In so doing, you can't really hold a strong position on a philosophical concept without having done at least a little bit of research. Why? Because I hate to tell you, there aren't a whole lot of new ideas out there. Right? So a lot of what you're going to be doing, somebody else has kind of thought either along your lines or has already refuted whatever it is that you're kind of holding as a absolute, right? So we have to be very careful about holding a position in philosophy without doing due diligence. Now, that being said, of course, nobody can hold someone accountable for knowing everything that's been written about a particular subject. But you can get a lot out of how people write. So when you're doing an annotated bibliography, what you're doing is you're researching scholarly works that have already situated themselves in the conversation, right? So this week you're going to be doing research on metaethics as a kind of grand sub-branch of ethics. Finding writings on metaethics as metaethics is both challenging and not. You're going to find lots of writings on topics within metaethics.
Yes.
But discovering what metaethics is actually going to be hard, right?
It is hard.
You're going to sit down and have to go through. You might have to start with the Wikipedia. If you've never touched this stuff before, ever in your life,
Wikipedia.
Sit down with Wikipedia.
Nope.
Wikipedia dumbs it all down, not to limit Wikipedia. It has its purpose, but it kind of makes statements from the perspective of someone who doesn't know the topic going in. It's an introduction. Now, it's not scholarly. You can't use Wikipedia as one of your entries. but it can set you up with the language, with kind of where the conversation's at. It can give you in the suggested readings area and in the bibliography for that article. Give you lots of things to work with. So it's worth it. Even though it's extra, it's more than, it's an extra thing to read in addition to the 5 things that you have to read, not including our required readings. But it's worth it. From there are 2 resources that are almost always going to be part of your required readings. You are allowed to use these as part of your references. So if it is a required reading, then you can use it as one of your bibliographic references, right? Because you're reading it. I'm not going to tell you can't take credit for that, right? So your required readings are usually going to come from one of 2 areas. One is the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. The Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy is a standalone system that was designed with you in mind, undergraduate students. The kind of point that they're trying to make with this is that philosophy should be something that is available to people, that there is kind of a repository where people can get general information without having to dig themselves out of all the minutia, right? It's not specific. One of the things that's beautiful about IEP is that it is not directly related to any one school. Most other internet resources are dedicated to a particular school, and that can have all kinds of I don't know, issues isn't really the right way of putting it, but let's say bias. It can have different kinds of bias. The IEP doesn't deal with that because it has authors and editors from kind of across philosophy. So in so doing, you've got a little taste of everything from little community colleges all the way up to, there are writers from Nigeria, there are writers from Hong Kong, trying to think who else outside of the US, right? Let's say that there's at least one Brazil university has a contributor. Anyway, quite a few. Of course, most Western philosophy is represented, which means the English-speaking countries, Canada, United States, Britain, South Africa, Australia, etc. Right? They tend to have representatives there. The interesting thing about that, of course, is that a lot of times when you have a subject that is considered Western, all of those will have very similar mindsets. So having kind of a Brazilian perspective and a Far Asian perspective and an Indian perspective and so on is really valuable. So IEP is great. So it's a really good resource, but it is an undergraduate resource, right? Meaning it is not terribly deep. It might feel like it when you first read it, but it's not very deep. It will give you what you need. Now, it does expect that you will have some language under your belt, right? So it assumes that when they use the word argument, that you know that they're talking about a propositional argument, a philosophical argument, right? They're going to assume that various other philosophy-specific terms, when they use those, that you go. That's the value. That's where Wikipedia comes in. Wikipedia kind of gets you to that point where you have some of that lingo down. And then when you sit down and read the IEP, there's at least something to work with. You don't have to look up every third word. So that's going to be one of your readings pretty much every week is going to be the IEP on our subject matter. The second subject, or the second source that you will almost always see every week is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. The Stanford Encyclopedia is associated with Stanford University, but it's massive, right? It is a massive undertaking. All philosophers use the Stanford Encyclopedia for kind of kicking off their research. So it's a very powerful resource. So even with its slight bias from Stanford, which is not, because it's so popular and commonly used, they get a lot of contributions from outside of the Western tradition, which makes things kind of nice. But the Stanford Encyclopedia is designed for philosophers. It assumes that you have a good idea of what's going on in the first place. It's all about bringing you up to speed on the conversation as it is now, right? Where does this topic stand right now? And because of that, it's in constant flux. It's constantly being updated. There's quite a few things that you're going to read in the Stanford Encyclopedia that might even contradict a little bit the IEP or Wikipedia, because maybe something was published 6 weeks ago that just hasn't filtered out to the general teaching body yet, but is prominent amongst research philosophers like myself. Right? So I teach as a secondary. My primary purpose is research. I do research in ethics, specifically in bias, specifically in kind of misogynistic bias, as we call it, or feminist ethics. I also do work in military ethics, kind of where I got my start, and so on. So I teach kind of as an adjunct in various locations. But I think I'm teaching at 3 schools right now, as a kind of to kind of keep teaching, because I do love the teaching. But I'm also a researcher at a full 4-year university, where I do the majority of my work. For me, the Stanford Encyclopedia is a lifesaver. There are times where I need to know where a particular topic is right now, and it's the best way, it's the best source to kind of see where something has come. I might be reading a work that was written in the late 80s, and who knows how many hundreds of papers have been written on that particular perspective since then. So the Stanford Encyclopedia, awesome source, very important, highly recommended. Actually required most weeks, but even in the weeks that we don't have it required, I think there's only maybe 2 of the 16 where you don't have to dig into the Stanford Encyclopedia. I don't remember off the top of my head. But the Stanford Encyclopedia is the deep dive, right? So with those 3 elements, starting from Wikipedia, which you can't use as a source, moving into the IEP, which should be almost every week, should be your first source. Should be the first thing on your bibliography, right? It's a required reading. You have to read it anyway. Might as well save yourself a little bit of trouble. I think there is 1 week in which we don't use the IEP. Can't remember off the top of my head for sure. I think it might have been, can't remember. Anyway, in the week that you can't use the IEP, you'll have a full 5 that you have to go dig for. The purpose then is to take those resources, once you've kind of got a handle on things, and go and dig. Go and find resources that either expand your conception of what the topic is about, or add to, give you another perspective, so to speak. So let's say you think that We're gonna dig into consequentialism here in a few weeks. Let's say that you can't stand it. You hate consequentialism, and all these things that you're finding in the IEP and in the Stanford Encyclopedia are pro consequentialism, and you want to find like somebody that came out and just hated on consequentialism. That's where you go, right? And this is your research. So your research culminates in a bibliography. Your bibliography, so it's important to understand the difference between an annotated bibliography, a reference list, and a works cited list, okay? If you are writing an essay, very seldom will you include a bibliography. Most of the time, you're including either a reference list or a works cited list. What's the difference between all these? Okay, let's start with a works cited list. A works cited list at the end of a document is a list of the works of the various readings and media or whatever where you have specifically quoted it in your essay or writing, whatever it is that you're writing, whether it be an article or a book or an essay or whatever. So it only includes those things that you have directly quoted from, right? So it doesn't include all of the things that you might have read that brought you to your idea or anything like that. It's just what you've cited in the document. Works cited lists usually are only used for undergraduate type work, mostly because the kinds of essays that you write at the undergraduate level, you're going to include some kind of quotation from just about everything that you read, because I remember being an undergraduate. It was a long time ago, but I remember if I read it, it's going in the essay. I'm not wasting my time reading much stuff I'm not going to actually quote. You will find, as your education continues, that there will be times where you need to read stuff to get you up to speed on the stuff that you want to write. That's when you get to your reference list. Your reference list includes not only those things that you've directly cited, but anything that has directly impacted your essay, the ideas that you put forth in your essay in the first place. So you might read an original document. Let's say you read something from Immanuel Kant, somebody that we will deal with in, I think, can't remember. But in a few weeks, we'll deal with some deontology. And let's say you go and read the original document, what he wrote back in the 1800s. We've come pretty far since the 1800s, so it's unlikely that you will actually use any of those quotations at the graduate level. Instead, you're going to use quotations from people who've been writing on him more contemporarily. But you're still going to add Kant as one of your references because you did read that document to kind of help with you getting your ideas. So it's a reference. It's something that you referenced in order to write your document, even though you're not doing a direct quotation. A bibliography takes it even a step further. A bibliography is any work that you think applies to your essay, right? So a bibliography is usually a fairly robust edition, and you really shouldn't ever use a bibliography for an essay unless your essay is for publication, all right? Bibliographies are a lot of guesswork. For people who are established academics and whatnot, your bibliography might include things that you read years ago that you know have these tidbits in there and are important for how your ideas have formed, and so on and so forth. So you tend to include everything that you imagine someone could use to further their knowledge on what it is that you've written, right? So a bibliography, unlike a reference list and a works cited list, isn't about somebody following your chain of reasoning, right? It's about someone very robustly finding out as much about the topic as they possibly can. Okay, and then an annotated bibliography is a pre-written document. Okay, you write your annotated bibliography before you ever start writing an essay. And what it is you go out and you research all the things that might apply to your topic. So let's say you're writing on metaethical concepts, and you want to very specifically consider the modern non-cognitive position. Okay, well, there's a lot to that. What is the non-cognitive position? What's the counter position? Who does the writing? Who doesn't do the writing? Who's working in that field right now? Et cetera, right? All that stuff needs to be figured out before you ever sit down to write your document. So you go through and you start your research. You start reading. An annotated bibliography is you going through, reading something, creating a citation for it, and then putting a little blurb. This blurb is for you. Right now, when you're in school, it's for you and whoever it is that assigned it. So you're kind of talking to both. You're talking to yourself and to your professor or whatever. What you're doing is you're reminding yourself what this is about, so that when you do sit down to write your essay, you can look at your annotated bibliography and say, oh yeah, that had a bit about this thing. I'm going to go and look at that again and see if it's got something that I need right now for inclusion. So an annotated bibliography is written before an essay is written, and it's usually done in a exploratory way, meaning that your annotated bibliography almost never will include all the things that you use in your document, nor will there be very many things on your annotated bibliography that you use in your document, right? So it's going to include a lot of things that maybe don't ever make it in there for whatever reason. So you're doing that pre-research. What you're doing is you're looking at this topic in such a way that you can now go out and do the work to write an essay. So the advantage being is that you don't actually have to write that essay, but you do have to do the research for it. All right. So you're doing research on metaethics this next week, specifically for the purpose of knowing what it is that metaethics is, and in preparation for the possibility of maybe writing something on metaethics in the future.
No.
Go ahead. Did you have a question? No.
Was that me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's all right. I wish you guys would butt in a little bit more often.
Oh, no, I do have a question about the annotated bibliography. So the little blurb that we put in underneath our citation where we find it, it's in our own words, correct? It's not, verbatim?
That's right.
Gotcha.
And it's a reminder. So it's not a massive summary, but it has to be specific enough that it actually references this document.
Okay.
So, if you read something like, the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and you do an annotated bibliography for that, you're not going to put an article on metaethics. That doesn't do you any good. What is it that article does for you? So something like, now this should be in your own words, but something like, this document details the basics of what metaethics is and provides some background on how the discipline came about. That might be something that you would write, okay? In later weeks, when we start getting into more specific topics, those blurbs might get a little bit longer, because to be specific enough to differentiate between the different documents that you read kind of requires a little more meat.
Right.
But this week should be fairly simple, right? This one goes into this level of depth and introduces the topic in this way. This one does this, and so on and so forth, right? Mm-hmm. So the annotation in general shouldn't be too much more than 100 to 150 words. Now that's assuming that you actually read the whole thing. I do not require you to read 5 20-plus page papers every week. That's too much. What I am expecting, though, is that given that these are going to be scholarly sources that you're looking for, I do expect that the vast majority of them will have either preambles or abstracts. You need to read through the abstract, find out through the abstract whether it is something that applies to the week, and then maybe read part of the introduction to get a feel for the direction of travel, right? Once you have that, then you can write your annotation fairly easily. Remember, your annotation is meant to be a reminder on what this document will do for if you were to have written, if you were doing
Right, essay, yeah.
So you're not going to be cutting a piece of the abstract out and writing that, right? It is kind of a summary in a way, but not a summary of the topic. It's a summary of its usefulness, right?
Oh, okay, okay.
So I tend to be fairly generous. Oh, sorry, I got a question. Yes, so we will try to do, there should be fairly rare exceptions, try to do one of these every Wednesday at this time, 6:30. They will run between 1 and 2 hours. The vast majority of them are 2 hours, given the fact that you have a 9.5 to 12-hour requirement as a 3-credit course. I think 2 hours is fairly generous. If you think about how, if you were to go to an actual college course, like an on-ground college course for this, you would be in class twice a week at a minimum, and those would be between an hour and 15 minutes to an hour and a half, or 3 times a week for 50 minutes apiece. So a 2-hour session, I think you can handle. And I do expect, if I do a session, even if you do not attend, you are responsible for the information that's presented. So go in and watch the recordings if you weren't able to actually be here. Being here means being here. So being here and just being a name on the block, there's really no interaction there. Why bother? At that point, just watch the recording. But if you're going to be here and you're going to be present and participating, then huge amounts of value come out of that. I would love to kind of show old lectures that I've done where we've had lots of comment and just been really amazing and beneficial, because in the terms in which I have massive participation in the live lectures, I have the least number of drops and the most number of A's.
Right.
So huge amount of value. If you make these every week and you don't get an A in the class, something went awry. Just to be kind of clear, that's never happened. It has never happened that if you attended even 80% of the live lectures, that you got a grade lower than an A in my class for these for the community college level classes. It just hasn't happened.
Will it be at the same time at 6:30?
Yeah, it'll be at 6:30 every Wednesday. And I understand that there are people that are not going to be able to make it. It's just, why do you take an online class? It's because it's flexible and because it's something where you kind of do it on your own time. I get it. People work. People have things to do. I work. I have things to do.
You stretch yourself pretty thin there, Professor, though.
No, it all works out. I have I have no regrets whatsoever in taking time to teach. And where I teach matters to me. So there's a reason that I teach for VCCS as opposed to like ODU. I've done a couple classes at ODU, and it's different. There's not as much that you can gain. A lot of them are the non-transfer students. They're students that are coming in with a degree of maybe privilege, maybe a little too much privilege. Some are coming in through expectation on somebody else's expectation rather than them wanting to be there.
Yeah.
At this level, and generally the level that I try to teach at, I'm teaching people who want to be here, who are interested in more than just getting a degree. That's what I like, and that's why it's worth it to me. I was teaching classes at a place where people are just trying to get a degree. How do you care about that? How do you get invested? But I can invest here because you want to be here. This is something that is important to you. If it's important to you, then it's important to me. Okay, so annotated bibliography, every week, 100 points, right? Annotated bibliography is a guaranteed element. The assignment page doesn't ever change, meaning that you technically could work ahead if you wanted to, but you can't ever submit until the week, right? So part of that is for attendance purposes and so on and so forth. So don't go and do like 3 weeks worth of research and then forget to upload your document. That would just suck. But you can work ahead. The assignments page never changes. It looks the same each week because the requirement is the same each week. It's just the topic changes, okay? So you're going to go and hunt down 5 scholarly sources. You're going to give them enough of a cursory reading that you can detect whether it is on topic or not. Do not include a bibliographic reference for something that's not on topic. Might feel like you wasted your time, but that's the whole point, right? The whole point is discovering what's a good source, what's a bad source. So you're going to run across things where you dig into something and it's just not right for what we're doing. I've already seen one. Somebody has turned in, they thought they'd get a little jump on things, and they turned in their document, and half their sources were non-scholarly, and the 2 that weren't even on topic. So, what's that?
I said, oh no.
Yeah, it means that they're going to turn around and do that entire assignment over again. Now that's the one advantage. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I have a question about the another one about the annotated bibliography. Can we use 5 sources from, you know, say the what was it, the IEP or the Stanford encyclopedia? They can all be from those, or do they have to go more in depth? Once you get there, go look up something else.
So probably every week, 2 of your entries are going to be the IEP and the SEP, because those are almost every week going to be your required readings. I don't think it's smart. I don't think it's good. I think it's wrong that I should make you buy a book. So the resources are out there and they're free. Why on earth would I make you buy a book for this class when I can give you all of that information for free? So that's why there's no book. There's no book because there's no need for a book. All that information is out there. And generally, the vast majority of academics, not all, but the vast majority, want you to have their information. They want you to learn this stuff. So the free resources are almost always better than the bought resources.
There will be we have to have 3, all 5 different ones.
There have to be 5 different ones.
Okay.
But they can be from the same source in various weeks. So like the IEP can be every week, but the topic will be different. The IEP is an encyclopedia.
Right.
Good?
I got you. Yeah, I got you.
Okay. For one little kind of, I run into it every term. If you are going to cite a book, make sure you cite a specific chapter in the book, unless it's particularly short. Couple reasons. First off, I'm willing to guarantee that you don't read an abstract for each chapter. So if you don't include the chapter, then you're bullshitting me. So the chapter in particular that you are referencing, that's the one that we need to see. If this doesn't mean that you can scapegoat a single book and pull multiple chapters out of it. That's not how it works. Find the chapter that's most relevant. Okay. Now, if it is a collection of essays, a book that's a collection of essays. So, for instance, for this week, there's this fantastic, one of the best kind of collection of writings on metaethics that I've ever seen, is a book called Arguing Metaethics. Great book, lots of articles in there, all from different people, from different perspectives. Each of those, for all intents and purposes, is a different scholarly source. It's not the same person writing 7 different chapters or 9 chapters or 19 chapters. So this week, if you had access to that particular book and was able to get in there and dig into it, you could probably pull all 3 sources from that book, and that'd be okay. As we get into less kind of general topics, that's going to be harder to find, but it is a route you can go. And sometimes you might even discover that the book is interesting enough that you might even pick it up. There's a lot of books that you can get from even like Barnes and Noble. They have a little section of philosophy that always kind of makes me cry because it's so small, but it's still there at least, and it has a lot of interesting stuff that you can pull from. Depending on what part of Virginia you're in, there is a place called Second and Charles that has several locations, but the one that I know best is the one in Newport News that has a massive philosophy section. Used bookstores are pretty good for that sort of thing. Problem is that a lot of the things that you're going to find in a used bookstore are going to be original works. So you might find works by Nietzsche, or you might find books by Plato, or so on and so forth. Those are great, but the amount of scholarship that's been done on those since then is pretty high. That said, it is never bad to know the original source. Never. And in fact, there's at least 2 weeks where you will be dealing with original source material. So as part of your required reading. But original source material is good to have. And some of it is really, really interesting enough that, spending $5 on a book at Second and Charles or another used bookstore won't feel like a burden. But that said, there's no required books. The original texts that you have to deal with for the class, I've either embedded directly into the course, or you can get them from Project Gutenberg or another source like that. And they're fairly easy to read on screen. If you are the kind of person that doesn't do well with reading on screen, I have checked with both campuses. You can print out required readings for this particular class for free at the library. Don't do that though unless you really need it. I had to pull favors. It was something that was asked of last semester in my evaluations. I thought it was a good idea to see if we can make it happen, but still should be fairly rare because some of these can be pretty meaty, especially if you end up not using them, right? So yeah, no book, Internet Encyclopedia, Stanford Encyclopedia, almost always. There's a significant number of resources that I've given you for finding other works, but the one that's probably going to be the easiest to use is Google Scholar. The problem with Google Scholar is that it doesn't filter for specific disciplines. So you might find a document that sounds like the title looks really good, but then when you look at the journal that it's coming from a psychology journal, or it's coming from a business journal, or an environmental journal, or something like that. It's not going to fly unless it's just super on point, right? And it has to be written by a philosopher. So, because that's what you're doing, right? You're trying to establish yourself in the conversation, which means that trained philosophy is where you find that position, right? There are a couple of small exceptions, but you'll know those when you see them. So that means that philosophical journals and philosophical websites that hold full articles are going to be the places to go. No more than one, but one of your entries can be an online lecture, but it has to be at least 45 minutes long, and it has to be by an established academic, so a college course that's been recorded or something along that lines. It needs to be on topic, and so on and so forth. Those are good, but a lot of times there's no context. You don't know what's been taught up to that point, or so on and so forth, and it kind of makes them hard to be useful. They don't have bibliographies or anything like that you can follow up on. So I'm not going to tell you not to use them. In fact, I post quite a few for you to kind of back up what I'm saying and back up the kind of little short videos. But in general, they're not the best place to get information. Best places to get information are going to be from scholarly works. Websites like, Quora and Answer Guru and some of these others. You can read them. You can read them all day. You can find all kinds of information on there, but they don't fly as bibliographic references. Okay. Anything less than article length isn't going to fly. Wikipedia, of course, can't be used as a scholarly work. Doesn't matter what school you go to, you can't use Wikipedia as a citation. So Wikipedia has inline citations. They have their footnotes. Follow the footnote. If something really interesting is said in Wikipedia and it resonates with you and you want to be able to quote that thing, then you need to follow the footnote and see where that person got that information. And then follow that to the original document. And then you can cite that original document once you've kind of gone in and made sure that due diligence has been done. But the problem with Wikipedia is that I could go in right now and change a bunch of the material in an entry. And it may take 6 hours, or it could take 2 weeks before somebody on staff notices that there's been a change and that it's wrong, especially if it's something that's particularly technical. One thing that is actually both kind of good and bad. So I'm considered an expert in my field, specifically within feminist ethics and virtue ethics. Within those areas, I could go and make changes to Wikipedia right now, and as an established expert, it would require probably months before someone came in and noticed that something was awry, and brought it to staff, because there's nobody on staff that knows as much about those topics as I do. Wow. So, I could go in there and put whatever I wanted. Let's say I had an idea that wasn't well established, that wasn't properly founded. I could go and throw it on Wikipedia, and nobody would know the difference until other experts came along and were like, "Hey, wait a minute, somebody's been screwing around," and then brought it just to kind of the attention of the staff. So Wikipedia, of course, for all college classes in all universities of any note, won't allow you to quote Wikipedia. So that's kind of my point there. So no Wikipedia, no videos under 45 minutes, and any video that you do use has to be a lecture of some kind. And so has to be by an established scholar. So when I say lecture, that can include conference talks and stuff like that. So like a TED Talk would be fine as long as it's by a philosopher on the topic, right? And there are a few of those. In fact, I think in this first week, you'll have an opportunity to watch a TED Talk. Well, TED Talks are fine as long as they are substantial, as long as they're long enough, right?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
What's tech? You said Tech Talk or TED Talk?
TED Talks. Are you familiar with TED Talks?
No, I've never heard of that.
The Turner Entertainment Group has a kind of lecture series that they've been doing for years. There's hundreds of TED Talks out there now. They're basically they invite experts to come in and talk on their topic. Usually it's They're put on by either a university or industry that has something to do with the topic. So you come in, you do kind of almost like,
Come near my elbow.
huh? What was that?
I don't know. It's not me.
All right. Point being that TED Talks are good. Conference papers, somebody having a recording of a conference paper that they've given, those are good.
Okay.
Video lectures, somebody recording their college class, those are good. But they have to be substantial. They have to be at least 45 minutes. Even 20-minute talks tend to not have enough information and lack the necessary kind of bibliographic references. Those tend to be for other professionals. The longer stuff tends to be more for teaching purposes, and that's what you need in order to.
How would we incorporate the TED Talk? Let's say we use the TED Talk into our annotated bibliography.
Okay, so there are, as far as the proper citation for a video, there is a detailed kind of format set up in the OWL. You can go and look at that. I'm not sure, but I think maybe even one of the examples is a video the examples that I posted for you.
Okay. We would still write our notes on it.
Yeah.
Underneath the citation.
Yep. In the exact same way. Again, you're kind of reminding yourself, what is it about this that was, valuable enough that I was willing to go back and watch it again or pull information from it.
Okay.
Let's see. No, I didn't include any videos on the on this particular set of examples, but it would be fairly similar. So if you got it from a website, there's actually a link in. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. In the Purdue OWL, in the Purdue OWL, there is a link that takes you directly to citing a video, and it'll tell you whether you pulled that off of did you pull it off of a website or is it a video that was on DVD or whatever like that, and it'll tell you how to cite those. All right.
Well, thank you.
No problem. No problem. I don't recommend them though. Watching them is definitely okay. Citing them, if it's not perfect, because they have a tendency to, a lot of those lectures tend to not be perfect. It can kind of lead to having a bad reference. So probably just better to go with articles. Plus, the nice thing about articles is that articles almost always will have the abstract, and being able to kind of scan the abstract saves you from having to sit through a 45-minute lecture and find out it's not on topic.
That's true.
So there is definitely value in going with like tried and true philosophical journal articles. So what else? What else do we need to dig into as far as expectations? So we are currently at hour and 15 minutes. I'd like to go a little bit into the topic for the week in a minute. So let's really try to knock out any other requirements. Okay, so I do want to say, just from what I understand, a lot of people have missed it. There is an icebreaker discussion. That discussion isn't worth any points, but it's kind of where you go in and introduce yourself. And I do have some fairly specific questions that I ask as far as academic integrity and kind of your level of knowledge on philosophy and whatnot. So it's good for me. I would really appreciate it if everybody posted in the icebreaker and introduced themselves. think that's pretty much it. That's all you really need to know right now. Discussions. Oh, that's one last thing with discussions. Understand that discussions are a group task, and in so much, a lot of people are counting on you to get your discussions in as quickly as possible, because it's hard to reply to someone if they post their discussion Sunday night at 11:25, which happens way more often than it should. You're not going to lose points, but you've cost your classmates in a way that is, for all intents and purposes, disrespectful. You're kind of holding everyone else back by doing that. The workflow that I've posted is designed to kind of give you an idea about how the week should look for you. All told, the amount of effort that you have to put into this class, as I've kind of lined it up, is still under the 3 credit line. So I'm not asking you to put in more time than you would normally have had to put in. But I am kind of asking you to break that out a little bit so that everybody gets a chance to participate. I have experimented in the past with having it where we did discussions over the course of 2 weeks, where you had an initial post in week 1, and then an initial post each week after that, and then replies in the follow, kind of on the last week in this week, and it didn't go very well at all. So it's just better if you can get your stuff in. If you can get it in by Wednesday, everybody's got time to really kind of dig into their responses. Anytime that there is a conversation going on in discussion, so the discussion boards close. They don't allow any more posting at the end of the week. You cannot make up discussions. Be very clear about that. Those points are lost in the week that they are in the week following their due date. So, and that's for obvious reasons, right? You can't have a discussion by yourself. If you've missed the week, then and you go in there and post, you're posting to nobody. You're just throwing words to the wind, so to speak. So discussions cannot be made up. If you do nothing else in a week, make sure you come in and do your discussion. Okay? I will accept the bibliographies all the way up until the end of the term. I'm not particular about that. You'll lose a lot of points, right? Don't make it a habit. There's nothing, in my opinion, there's nothing worse than getting half credit for work that you did that should be worth full credit. That sucks so bad. So try to get those in the week that they're due. But if you find yourself stressed and trying to prioritize, and there's some reason you just can't get to it, do the discussion first. The annotated bibliography is useful, and it kind of sucks because the annotated bibliography, of course, would help with your discussion almost always, because you've done the readings, you're up to speed. But that would, that requires you putting a lot of kind of front loading each week and then doing your actual assignments after that. That's fine if you can do that and you have the time free to do that, by all means. And especially since you can see the topic. You can't really get into the lecture notes and everything until the week that they're due, but you can see the topic in the modules. So you can kind of do some pre-research and kind of work forward that way, and then dig into the discussions when the time comes. I'm not sure. Let me check something really quick before I say something to make an ass of myself.
I have a question for this first discussion post. So it's asking for the differences between the branches of ethics and normative ethical theories. are we breaking them down individually, like specific as possible?
In as
Like
much as,
describing metaethics and normative ethics and applied ethics.
yeah, but kind of in that same annotation way, right? So this is a rough definition of normative ethics. This is a rough definition of metaethics. These are sub-branches in the branches of philosophy,
Okay.
branch of philosophy of ethics. And then there's theories. There's a difference between branches and theories. Like, that's what I'm interested in. You need to know that there's a difference between virtue ethics and consequentialism. That is a very different kind of difference between metaethics and applied ethics, right?
Now, where do we find the information for those?
It's all in the lecture notes. The lecture notes will get you started. Everybody knows how to get to the lecture notes, right?
I've just read the announcements. I haven't seen the lecture notes.
Okay. When you first log in and you go into the class.
Canvas?
What's that? Sorry,
I think she said, is it in Canvas?
Yeah, in Canvas. When you first log into Canvas and you go into the class, your home page will have a list of links.
Mm-hmm.
That list of links, each of those weeks, that's your page. That's where all your information is. Required readings, required tasks for the week, lecture notes, videos, links to the particular discussion that you're going to be doing. All of that stuff is on that page. So if you're not going all the way into the page and you're just skipping to discussion or skipping to assignment, you've got nothing to work with, absolutely nothing. I didn't even realize you could do that. But yeah, the links on the home page are your assignment. That is your lesson, so to speak.
For the
week. So some weeks you can't get into. I have it set so that you have to go through them in order, and that you have to actually work on them 1 week at a time. That's very purposeful. This stuff can't be absorbed if you try to slam it all down in 2 weeks, right? Just to get it done. It doesn't work that way. You need time to let it process. That said, I still think we work too quickly because of the amount of kind of philosophy 101 and logic that I have to include in the class, just for you to be able to engage with this stuff at all. But that said, go into the link on the homepage for the week. It includes lecture notes. It includes a couple of videos. Try to include a couple of short videos that just sort of get you in the mindset, give you a frame of reference to work with. From there, read through the lecture notes. Usually about, maybe 1 or 2, at most 2 scrolls worth of screen time. And that's just, again, to kind of set you up for what it is that you're going to be doing research on. Your research is where you're getting the majority of a feel for how the conversation is going. These lecture notes are kind of designed to be very cursory and universal and timeless. Very seldom will there be anything that I've posted that is controversial or where I don't include both sides of the situation and so on and so forth. So there's lots of things that you can go in and get out of the lecture notes that give you a direction to work with, and then from there you can go and do your research. Trying to do your research without reading these notes and going through the various videos and whatnot, wow, like that'd be impressive if you could pull it off, because you have nothing to work with otherwise. This gives you everything that you need. Also, this has all your required readings. That links to your required readings. So you kind of have to go in here in order to get to those. It also will include a link to the assignment and a link to the discussion. Yeah, pretty much everything that you need outside of these videos, these weekly chats, will be pre-posted for the week. And so Sunday night, it becomes available. First thing Monday morning, Sunday night. You can pop in, consume whatever information you can at your earliest convenience, and then go from there. Start doing your research. That said, there is a lot of pre-research that you can do by just like after a couple of weeks and you get a feel for how things work, you can start doing a little bit of pre-research so that, because you know the template for the bibliography, so that's not completely, from scratch every week. You can do a little bit of work on that. But like I said, don't forget, if you do an assignment ahead of time, don't forget to actually submit it when it's finally due.
So we won't be able to upload the assignments until Sunday?
No, you won't be able to upload your assignment until the week that it's due. You could do it like at 12:01 on Monday morning if you wanted to. That'd be fine. Or any other time throughout the week. But Sunday night at 11:59, your submission becomes late. So you'll be able to submit it late if you aren't able to get to it, but it starts acquiring penalties at that point. Discussions, on the other hand, those are completely cut off Sunday at 11:59, so you can't go back in. So I got sidetracked on that. One of the things that you have available to you is in the Icebreaker forum. That forum has no open or close. So if you're having a conversation in a week, you've already done all the required stuff, but now you're in it with one of your classmates on a topic, you can move that conversation to the discussion, to the Icebreaker board. And then you can continue having your conversation if you want to. Usually happens a couple of times a term. It's fairly handy. It can get a little heated sometimes, so be respectful. But otherwise, great place to kind of take a subject and really run with it. And given the fact that you sort of lose access to it as soon as the week is done, should never be a reason to stop talking. All right. Any other questions about expectations, navigation, requirements for the course,
No, sir.
administrative stuff?
If we need anything, will you reply to our emails?
Yeah. So there are kind of three ways that you can get a hold of me. I am, just admittedly, I'm not very responsive to text messages or to telephone calls for a lot of reasons. Mostly it's because I'm old, and the method that is used for relaying text messages, including things like verbal shortcuts and whatnot, just drive me batty. So I tend to, if you're going to text me in full sentences. But that said, email is the absolute best with using the inbox system in Canvas at a very close second. Okay, so you can either inbox me through Canvas or you can send me a direct email. Those will always get a response, usually fairly close to when you send it. I get a notification when those come in. If it's something that looks like it's an absolute emergency, I will try to drop everything and answer it. But a lot of times, for one, I might need to go and find information for you, or two, I'm just in the middle of something and it'll take me a little while to get back to it. But it'll almost always be within a few hours. Always less than 24 hours, unless the sky is falling. But yeah, so in the grand scheme of things, email is the best, with inboxing being the second best. I will use the inbox almost exclusively when I'm having conversations with you, unless we just have an email exchange going. But if I'm initiating a conversation, I'll be using Canvas inbox. Okay, so if you don't have that linked to your email and you're not getting notifications, I highly recommend you go and do that. It's clean, it's easy, it holds the information in Canvas so that you can always go back and re-reference it. So it's the best way to make it all work. Okay, so I'm definitely happy to do all of that. If it is something where we need to spend a little time, then we will use this platform. We'll use Zoom. We'll set up a time and both hop on. I can Zoom from my phone, so if it's worst case scenario, I'm not going to be around a desktop for a while, we can still make that work. But if you are going to do a Zoom session with me, for the love of God, please have your video and audio enabled. Okay? The black screen thing is killing me. I mean, at least Heather's got a picture. But yeah, so that's how I do office hours. I do office hours generally using Zoom, though I do make it a point to try and hold sessions if I do a campus visit. If there's ever a need, like a kind of need's probably the wrong word, but if there's a desire where enough people have interest for a local campus visit, where we kind of just do a bunch of sessions, like that's fantastic. I'm happy to do that. Less likely to do a campus visit for if nobody's needs it or wants it. Okay. Anything else? Any other questions about the course?
No, sir.
All right. Let's talk about some metaethics. Try to make this short and sweet. Okay. So the point of the discussion board question is to help you sort of understand that there is a couple of things going on here, right? Ethics as a branch of philosophy has a lot of parts and pieces, right? So philosophy is a weird discipline. Within philosophy, as far as academics go, since pretty much the flippin' Renaissance, there hasn't been a philosopher that knows all of philosophy. It's just not how it works. There's just too many things going on. There are a number of branches in philosophy. Ethics is one of them, but it is only one, right? Anybody want to take a stab at what some of the other branches might be? Anybody know?
Going back. Now it's frozen.
Oh, no. Hello?
This is going to be a rough one.
Okay.
I think she might be having some problems.
What's that?
So I think she might be having some problems.
Oh, okay. That's fair enough. All right. So some of the branches that we might run into, we've talked about one of them other than ethics. That's logic. Logic is a branch of philosophy. Metaphysics. Metaphysics is the study of concepts outside of the realm of science that are still meaningful to reality. So something like, what is the nature of time? Is there anything that exists beyond the present, both before and after, or are we kind of constantly in a present state? What's the nature of something like physicality? Is the world actually a physical manifestation, or are we all mental projections? Or like, that's all metaphysics, and it can get really, really crazy sometimes. But generally, it's about challenging a lot of basic assumptions.
Is morality one of the branches?
What's that?
Is morality one of the branches?
Well, morality and ethics are inextricably linked, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, actually.
Okay.
How they're different. But morality, the concept of morality, is an ethical concept. Ethics is the name of the branch, but it's sometimes the study of that branch is called moral philosophy. So the terms are used kind of back and forth a lot, but they do have technical definitions. We're going to get to that. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. How do we know? What do we know? What things can we know? Does knowledge change? Does truth change, etc. Right? There's philosophy of mind. Philosophy of mind is are we conscious? Is there something special about human reason? Or is it just a manifestation of some higher order? What is the subconscious? What does it do? Is the subconscious more powerful than the conscious? All of these kinds of things, right? There's philosophy of history, philosophy of science, philosophy of language, philosophy of law, philosophy of education. Those are all kind of branch philosophies. Basically, they ask questions of basically, just to kind of really dumbly sum those up. Is this important? And why? Is what it comes down to. There's philosophy of religion, which is the study of, not of religions or of religious doctrine, that's theology. Philosophy of religion is more of a study of philosophy or of religion itself. What is it? What does it do? What's its purpose? Is it valuable? Is it real? What are its problems? Those kinds of things. Philosophy of religion is one of the few other philosophy classes that you can usually get at schools that don't have a dedicated philosophy department. But unfortunately, as of right now, I don't know about Paul DeCamp, but I know Eastern Shore only offers it. Philosophy of religion has the same problems as ethics does, in the sense that without those preamble courses, it's very difficult to kind of get anywhere. Political philosophy is related to ethics in a lot of ways, but it is its own thing. And then aesthetics, the kind of study of beauty and art and creativity. I do a lot of work in aesthetics. One of my areas of research is in moral conflict in literature. So you can get into moral concepts. In a way, you can kind of get into moral concepts with pretty much any branch if you wanted to. But that said, I don't know anything, literally nothing about, say, philosophy of science. I've never studied it. It's entirely outside of my purview. I don't know who the big names are in it because it doesn't cross my path at all. I know a little bit about metaphysics because there's places where morality comes into play. I know a little bit about epistemology, aesthetics, logic, political philosophy, philosophy of mind. I could go to a conference where somebody's giving a paper on one of those topics and I could sort of follow along. But at a philosophy of science conference, I would be worse than an undergraduate because I'd be expected to know something and I wouldn't. It's just, there's just no way to do it. So there's one of the things that's interesting about philosophy is that it's kind of all over the place. It used to be more cohesive, but then, like I said, parts get pulled out, pieces get pulled out and become their own disciplines. So it's kind of important to be able to kind of see how they all were originally connected and then why they are kind of a Jenga right now. And will continue to be. They'll continue to get more and more minimalized as certain things are figured out. Philosophy of mind will probably get absorbed into epistemology the minute that science can really nail down what consciousness is. But right now, that's what we talk about in philosophy of mind. There are concepts in philosophy of mind that have to do with identity, personal narrative, what does it mean to be alive and conscious versus what does it mean to be alive and a vegetative in a vegetative state? Does that matter? Does your life still count as life without that consciousness? So lots of things to talk about in there, but it all kind of comes down to consciousness. And consciousness is one of those things that eventually it's hoped that we will find kind of an answer to, whether it be scientific or not. It doesn't matter. We'll find an answer to it. But that's been going on since 1812 with Descartes. Descartes sort of kicked us off on this branch. So 1812, we've been trying to figure out the answer and we still haven't got it. So ethics is the branch that we're interested in. Now we are also interested in logic because you can't do ethics without logic. In fact, you can't do philosophy without logic. Logic is one of those things that you just can't take it away. Now, as a branch of philosophy, as opposed to a methodology, there have been attempts to usurp it, especially in mathematics, but they've all failed. Ethics is still, or logic is still ours. So what is ethics then? If all these other things are, this is study of consciousness, this is the study of reality, this is the study of science, this is so on and so forth, what's ethics? To kind of sum it up, ethics is the philosophy of living life, right? What is the best life? How do we get along with other people? How do we live well? That summary is actually pretty good because it all sort of comes back to that. How do I live? What tools do I have that make my life valuable and worth living? Am I happy? Am I satisfied? Do people want to be around me? Am I the kind of person that is protective, or am I the kind of person that needs protection? And all of these kinds of things are topics within ethics. Three directions of travel. So these are the sub-branches, or you might call them the segments, sections, however you want to call it. There are three parts to ethics. The part that we're talking about today, metaethics, is the study of ethics. So ethics being the study of the philosophy of life, so to speak, then metaethics is the study of ethics. So it's looking at the world of ethics as a thing in and of itself. What does that mean? Well, it means, okay, so if we're doing a philosophy of life and we're trying to theorize what's the best way to live a good life, the metaethicist would come in and say, excuse me, what do you mean by good? So they're not actually asking you a question that has anything to do with how good your life is. They're asking you about an aspect of what it is that you're looking at, right? That underlying tidbit, that definition, if you will. So you might think, well, how can we do any other philosophy on ethics if we haven't nailed down metaethics? Well, we'll get to that in a minute, but frankly, it's really easy. Most of the time when it comes to metaethics, ethical theorists tend to consider those questions, but only cursorily, because there's lots of things that we can do under a certain set of assumptions. Okay, so what are the other branches, sub-branches? There's ethical theory, sometimes just called normative ethics, sometimes called prescriptive ethics, and a couple other things that sort of gets thrown in there. But in the grand scheme of things, it's ethical theory. Ethical theory is the study of systems of thought that lead to a good life, right? So these are basically the study of logical machines is about the easiest way I've ever been able to describe it. These are logical machines. They don't actually tell you anything in and of themselves. Instead, what they do is they provide plans and processes, systems that you implement to make decisions, right? It's about consistency. It's about making decisions that are directed in the right direction. And it's about decisions that are based on a theory of good that best works for the system, right? So if I say something like a consequentialist ethic, what I'm saying is this is an ethical system that is directed towards the outcomes. If I say a deontic ethic, I'm saying this is an ethical system that is directed toward intention, right? So these two things are fundamentally different. I can kind of have an idea what the outcome might be, but be focused only on the intention, or I can be focused on the outcome and have to, stress the kind of lack of value that intention has. The whole road to hell is paved by good intentions. That's the consequentialist mantra, right? It doesn't matter what the intentions are, it's what the outcomes are. Those two ideas are fundamentally opposing, even though both of them might lead to a good life, as long as you're consistent, right? As long as you have these systems built in and you have the right moral backing. So ethical theory is about that. It's about creating these systems that allow us to make decisions and learning how to best implement moral concepts within those systems, all right? Then our last branch is applied ethics. Applied ethics is the least ethics-like, the least philosophical of the ethical branches in philosophy or in ethics, because a lot of applied ethics are less like ethics and more like laws, more like rules. A professional ethic or an applied ethic does not require you to be invested in it. It just requires you to comply, right? So if you are if you're a soldier and there are military ethics at play, you don't have to agree with the military ethics. That's not what it's about. It's about following those ethics regardless, right? And we'll talk about applied ethics in a couple of weeks. But just know that applied ethics is less ethics and more rules and laws. That's not to say that there isn't value in them, and that's not to say that there isn't ethical grounding in them. They are not laws. They share more in common with a law than they do with, say, an ethical system or a moral. So normative ethics are really the kind of key area that we are going to be looking at. We'll spend a little bit of time with metaethics this week, a little bit of time with applied ethics later on, but really what we're going to focus on in this class is normative ethics, is ethical theory. We're going to be looking at the categories in normative philosophy, normative ethics, right? Those categories break down fairly simply. There are two massive parent categories. Of those, so those two massive parent categories are deontic ethics and consequentialist ethics. In theory, everything falls into one of those two things. We are either looking inwardly or we are looking outwardly. All of our systems have to choose one of those two things, right? Within consequentialist ethics, we have two kinds of consequences. So that kind of brings us to two sections in consequentialist ethics. The first section is one that deals with acts and results. So the acts that we do, those actions that we take, and the direct results of those actions. And then there's another, and that's called consequentialism. It sort of gets to keep the name of the parent category. And then there's those kinds of ethical systems that are less concerned with the action and less concerned with the outcome and more concerned with what kind of person it makes you. Does this act improve you as a person? Does it make you a good person? And those are called virtue ethics. So you have virtue ethics, consequentialist ethics, and deontic ethics. In deontic ethics, there are lots of little categories, but or I shouldn't say categories. There are lots of theories, but deontic is the category, right? So for all intents and purposes, we have three categories of those three categories, two of them are kind of embedded in one. Deontic ethics, all by itself, one big massive category, anything that comes from some kind of internal drive, a desire to be right in action, regardless of what the outside world, what happens in the outside world, right? There are some ethical systems that take that whole cloth and just really kind of bury themselves in it. Then there are some that sort of skirt the line, and then there's some that straddle the two systems quite a bit. We'll get into that later. Then there's teleological systems. Teleological means towards the end. So you might think of the big, massive parent category as teleological ethics, with the two subcategories as consequentialist ethics and virtue ethics. So you need to know those three. Those are the three that you need to master. Deontic ethics, consequentialist ethics, virtue ethics. You need to know that teleological ethics is kind of the parent of these other two. If I ask a question that has to do with direction of travel, you're going to answer either deontic or teleological. If I ask you a question about the category that a theory sits in, you're going to answer either deontic, consequentialist, or virtue. Does that make sense? Do we understand how those are two different questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So teleological systems are they tend to be a little more scattered. They're kind of all over the place. Deontic systems tend to be a little more linear. There's only so many ways that you can internalize good behavior. So deontic ethics is actually fairly easy. A lot of times it's just called deontology, but deontology is not the only deontic ethic. So we'll get into that when we start talking about deontic systems. But understanding that there's that difference is important. Okay, so that brings us back to, okay, we've got these categories. That's great. What does that mean for metaethics? Why do we care about metaethics if this is what we're studying? Well, there's one or two concepts in metaethics that are really important to us. All right. First, we have to at least examine the concept of the good. What does it mean? What does good mean? One of the things that's interesting about that word is that everybody kind of has an idea what it means, right? If you talk to people across cultures, across religions, all these other kinds of things, generally, we can kind of come to a bit of an agreement about what good is in our own head. But the minute that we try to actually put that to words, kind of write it down, or we try to define it, it's just, there's so many things that, well, is it good to not have to suffer? Yeah, that sounds pretty good. That seems like it's a good thing to not suffer. Well, okay, but is it good to have somebody be in a vegetative state? Because they're not suffering, they're not doing anything. Right? No, that's not good. Okay, so maybe not suffering doesn't quite cover it. We need more. Well, how about not suffering and alive? So you have, there's all these different ways that you go at it. And there's times where something will fit in certain circumstances and then not fit in other circumstances. And then there's times where there's things that seem like they are normally bad, but in the end we discover that they're necessary in order for the good, and so on and so forth. So the good is one of those things that we call an open question. You have to kind of have a concept of the open question in order to move forward with ethical theory. Understanding that we all kind of get what it means to be good, or to what the good is, enough that we can at least make progress on trying to figure out how to live a good life, right? We can make progress. We might need to, if we get really close, we might need to kind of hammer down our definition a little bit better. But right now, we've got enough room to move that having that hardcore definition of good isn't such a big deal, right? So that's just one of those things. You're going to run across it in your readings because there's some philosophers that just won't let it go. They want that definition. They want it back. And these tend to be meta-ethicists. Meta-ethicists just, they're not willing to give up on that one big thing. Like, you can't do the work without the definition. Well, actually you can. It's been happening for a really long time. But the point being that you're going to run across that. So understanding that the good is an open question is a big deal. Okay. The other concept of metaethics that's really important to us, and the part that you will need to know and really have a firm grasp on as we move through the course, is the difference between values, ethics, and morals. Okay? Values, ethics, and morals are different things. Related, importantly related, but not the same. Oddly enough, values, ethics, and morals are meta-ethical concepts. They're not normative ethical concepts. Why? Because they're the parts. They're the pieces that go into a theory in order to make a theory complete. So anytime you're talking about the parts of a theory, you're talking about the meta of that theory. So when we're talking about metaethics and we're talking about morals, what we're talking about is all those little tidbits that go into an ethical system in order to lead you in the right direction, right? So one of the things that's interesting about morals is that there's no such thing as a moral that covers everything, right? You might have all kinds of little axioms and ideas. You know, the golden rule pops up so often because as a child, the golden rule is a kind of great tool for getting kids to at least start thinking ethically. Problem is that the golden rule is it's a kid's parable. It's not enough. It doesn't answer the question in the right sort of way. It doesn't lead you to a good life. But it's a great starting point. It's a great place to begin. But it's not, in and of itself, it's not an ethical, a moral. It's an ethical system. It's just a bad one. It's just an incomplete one. There are other kinds of morals that we have that have very limited scope. You know, why is it important to be modest? Why do we wear clothes when we go outside instead of just running around naked when it's nice outside? Is there a reason for that? Is there a good reason for that, or is it just some weird societal thing? That is a moral, unless we can find that it has, you know, some other kind of basis. But that's something that we do because we think that it's good. But it only applies to this very small part of our life, right? So morals are these little rules or little tidbits that we use towards life guidance that apply in usually fairly small amounts, in little small places. Now the thing about morals are that when you start combining all of the morals that you have, they start to coalesce into a system in a way. There's this, what you will hear me refer to this often, the bucket of morals. The bucket of morals is all those little precepts and thou shalt nots and whatnot that you deal with in life, that you've been, you know, getting from your parents and teachers and friends and your own observations and all these other kind of things. You've been building all of this bucket of morals, these little tools that you use to decide on what the right thing to do is, right? Most of them are very specifically negative in the sense that they abridge your ability to do stuff. They tell you not to do things. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. We do have some morals that are positive, but they tend to be a little less common, or at least they tend to be a little less commonly followed. People will say that they have the moral, but they don't. So something like, one should be kind, a person should be kind. Well, sure, most of the time, but that opposed to, say, not killing someone, there's a huge difference, right? So that's the difference between prescriptive and negative morals, right? Negative morals deny you access to a thing that you might want to do. Prescriptive morals are those morals that tell you to do a thing, right? Now, Those morals usually are limited in scope, and in a lot of cases can lead to contradictions, right? So you might have a paired moral. This is a set of morals that I often define for myself, that I hold as important. Take no shit. Do no harm. Right?
Right.
Can we think of situations in which those two things might come into conflict?
Yeah.
Lot, right? If someone's coming into my house and they weren't invited, I'm probably going to do harm, right? Because I'm not willing to take that. I'm not a pacifist in that way, and most people aren't.
Yeah.
But we still think that doing no harm is really important, right? So we take two things and we try to work with them in such a way that we try to get as close to both as possible. Well, that's really hard to do unless you have a system, unless you have something that helps you make that decision. That's when ethical theory comes into play, right? Ethical theory is about systems that you dump your bucket into. It's like a machine. You dump your bucket in there, and anytime that a decision is required, that decision-making process comes into play. And it takes all those morals, it aggregates them in the right kind of way, and it spits out a decision, right? And as you master this, as you become better at it, you become more confident in your actions. You become more limited in the contradictory actions that you take because of your consistency. You become less, and this is tried and true, you become less judgmental. You become less worried about things like people moralizing, which is in modern society it's like an ultimate sin, which is idiotic. It's idiotic that if somebody comes in and mentions good things and how to live good lives, that people should be offended by that. That's idiotic. That should be the thing that we want to hear the most. We want to hear about ways that we can be better people, right? And not sure of the demographic, but who here has heard of virtue signaling? Do you know what virtue signaling is?
I haven't heard of that.
Okay, it's amongst the internet social justice crowd and various others. Virtue signaling is those people who come in and talk about how good they are, right? I'm so good because of this, and this.
Oh,
And that seems to really piss people off. Go ahead.
Well, you shouldn't have to brag about how good you are. It should be seen.
But is there anything wrong with bragging about being a good person?
I guess not.
Why is that wrong?
No, it's not wrong. I just
Think
just
about
don't.
it this way. Why is it that a lot of people choose to say cheat on their taxes? Why do you think that is?
To get more money.
Get more money, but there's lots of ways to get money. You could rob a bank and get more money. You don't see people robbing banks, but you see a lot of people cheating on taxes. Why? Why do you think people cheat on taxes but don't rob banks?
I don't know.
It's
You
less
get arrested for
discreet.
both.
I don't know. I don't know why people cheat on taxes.
I missed what you said, Heather. I got the other two.
I guess it's less discreet than if you would rob a bank.
So discretion might be part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But really the big part about it is that everybody does it, right?
Right.
There are lots of discrete ways to make money too, right? You could sell drugs over the internet. But everybody cheats on that. Everybody cheats a
You
little
sell
bit.
drugs over the internet?
That's exactly what I said. I said, what? That's a thing?
If we're talking about discretion, if that's what we're worried about, and that's why we don't commit certain crimes, there's lots of ways to be discreet and commit crimes.
Right.
But cheating on our taxes is just one of those things that just about everybody who's lived more than a couple of years in the sector where they pay taxes will cheat on their taxes a little bit. And they'll do it because, like, everybody does it. It's one of those things that just everybody gets.
I get you.
But
Everybody else is doing it.
imagine if everybody was talking about, like, oh, yeah, I don't treat people that way. That's a horrible way to treat people. And it's like, oh, yeah, that is kind of a horrible way to treat people. And then you start not treating people that way, and you go around, yeah, I don't treat people that way. And it becomes a thing where everybody eventually is saying that because that's the way things are.
Right, the influence.
A lot of times people do dirty stuff because they think that it's the way things are, right? I'm not going to be the good person when everybody else is being the bad person. So if we kind of boosted the volume on the good stuff, maybe it would change some of that. Virtue signaling only becomes wrong when you use it as a weapon, when you use it to hurt someone. If you say, I'm a good person, but you're crap, that's a very different kind of thing than saying, I gave $200 to charity today, right?
Oh, yeah.
So it's important to kind of make those distinctions about, how you vocalize, the good things that you do, and so on. So the point being is that we might have certain kinds of moral groundings for our ethics that include something that is generally not seen as being good. But because we have the right kind of confidence in what we're doing, we don't care, right? We don't care that other people don't see it as good because we're confident that it is good, right? So I can feel 100% confident in virtue signaling as long as I'm not using it as a weapon because I know that it is good. It's a good thing. It ends in a positive result. But, I can't do the same thing with cheating on taxes, right? I can't do that with cheating on taxes.
Right.
I can say everybody does it. And if if somebody comes along and says, I don't cheat on my taxes, it would be really idiotic for me to say, man, you're just moralizing. You're just trying to make me feel bad. No, I'm making a statement about myself.
Yeah.
Do with that what you will. If that makes you feel guilty or whatever, maybe there's really good reason for that, right? So the confidence that comes with having an ethical system leads to, first, quickness of decision, confidence in your decisions, and a kind of a mental resilience that comes from making decisions that are particularly hard, right? We will deal with ethical dilemmas in this class. I have one hard and fast rule when it comes to ethical dilemmas. If I present you an ethical dilemma that has two possible answers, that's your level of choice. You don't get to try to weasel out. Don't mess with my thought experiments, okay? You will see me re-reference this rule every time I bring up a thought experiment because everybody tries to weasel out. Well, I wouldn't do that because I would try this little thing over here. I don't care about that little thing over here. The idea is you need to tackle this problem from a perspective in which these are your choices, because now you have to wrestle with a concept about what your choice actually means, right? It's not about the actual thought experiment itself. That's just a tool to kind of let you get your head wrapped around something, to take it out of the abstract. It's not a tool for you to find a way to try to weasel around it, all right? So we'll deal with at least 4 or 5 fairly difficult thought experiments. Some of them are tried and true. People have seen them 1,000 times. Some of them are a little more obscure. But the end result is almost always there will be one answer that you're allowed to give, whether it be in one direction or another. Any answer outside of those is invalid. What's important is that you justify that answer with something other than, no, it just seemed right. Right? You need to be able to say why.
Right.
Why did you make that decision? Right?
Could we give an example? Like you say, take this direction or the other one. Can we say the scenario for taking either direction, or just get to pick one?
Right. So, for instance, something like saying, well, I wouldn't do anything in that situation is a decision, right? And that's
Right.
almost always going to be one of the possible choices, but it's going to have implications, right? It's going to have huge implications.
Oh, okay.
Almost always, with a thought experiment that has what we call a dichotomous selection, where there's only two possible answers that you're allowed to take.
Mm-hmm.
One of those choices is almost always do nothing. So you either act or you don't act.
Okay.
Now there are
So
some
fight or flight.
What's that?
Oh, nothing.
The end result is that a lot of times you have to wrestle with making a decision that's really, really hard, and having a chance to kind of see what that's like. What's it feel like to make a decision based on an ethical theory that maybe you thought you were starting to agree with, but now that you've had to make this really tough decision, you're not so sure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or what happens if I have to deal with this in real life? So there's lots of times where one of the things that ethical dilemmas do for us is they give us a chance to wrestle with a problem before it becomes a problem, right? So it's like practice. And that way, I know a vast majority of you, over half the class are nursing students.
Mm-hmm.
That's the future you're looking at. You're going to have to make a life decision at some point.
Yeah.
Somebody is going to live or die based on your decision. Mm-hmm. That's a decision you need to wrestle with now.
Yeah.
Before it becomes something where you end up losing multiple lives because you didn't act or wouldn't act. Mm-hmm. Right? So these kinds of tools are there for you, not for you to weasel out of, but for you to actually struggle with, so that you realize that when it becomes real, there is a decision that can be made and there are reasons for making it. And you can make that decision with confidence, right? So that's what ethical theory is all about. The morals are just there to kind of provide fuel. Now, there's a lot of the ethical systems we're going to talk about come with a built-in set of morals, which means that they require, in a lot of cases, getting rid of some of those morals that you might hold dear. An example might be that, based on your personal set of morals, you think that brutal honesty is a good thing, right? You think that it's wise, it's the right thing to do, to be honest to a fault in all things, right? But then you start, studying a particular ethical theory, and in that ethical theory, there are circumstances in which the end result is such that the best possible thing that you could do is, it sucks to say lie, but it is be deceptive.
Yeah.
But it is, in all intents and purposes, it's a lie, right?
Yeah.
So being able to make that decision within this safety net of a class and in a discussion in which you can change your mind if you want to, really opens doors for you later in life for being able to make decisions when it matters, right? So it's a big deal. That's what this class is all about. All right, and then, so as far as what a moral is, that's a meta-ethical concept that is used as those bits and pieces that we use to populate our ethical systems. Ethical systems are in and of themselves morally neutral. They're just decision-making processes. Without the right morals to populate them, you're not making decisions at all, right? There's just nothing there. Or you're making really bad decisions consistently, just because you don't have the right moral grounding. So moral grounding is one way of talking about it. Bucket of morals is my little play on words with it. But anytime we're talking about the collection of morals that a person has collected over their life, sometimes through no fault of their own, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about this moral grounding, right? The thing that we use to populate our decision-making processes. The vast majority of people don't have a decision-making processes that's consistent. They have lots of different ways that they look at the world, and they sort of choose which one that they want to use depending on the situation. And unfortunately, that leads to a lot of really bad decisions, and sometimes it leads to what we call stagnation or paralysis, right? Where you can't make a decision because you don't know which system to use. So, you know, we're going to hopefully give you the tools so that we can cure that. Okay, so that's what ethical theory is all about, and that's where metaethics intersects with our theory. So that's why it's important to know a little bit about metaethics. A lot of times you'll hear in your readings, in your research, in videos that you watch, people use morals and ethics or morality and ethics as synonyms. As we kind of progress through the class, you'll start to learn when people are using them in technical ways or when people are using them kind of more loosely. I'll even kind of fall into the trap sometimes. It's the nature of language. But morals or moral grounding, when I use those two terms, I'm talking about metaethical concepts. Those parts and pieces that make up an ethical system, make up the kind of the fuel of an ethical system, right? So knowing that is important. Knowing what an ethic is, it's this kind of machine, this decision-making machine, this logical construct that we have in our minds. And then values. So a value is quite easily summed up as those things that have value, right? And it's a personal thing. So there's things that you might find very valuable, not necessarily monetarily or systematically or even sympathetically. There's lots of reasons we might find something valuable. And some of those might have nothing to do with whether we like it or not. We might think it's valuable but not like it, right? An example might be, I think it's valuable that companies, in order to survive and continue to exist, occasionally have to fire people, right? It's just one of those things. I think it's right to do that rather than drive a company into the ground and then everybody's out, right?
Yeah.
But I don't like it at all. I don't like the fact that people lose their jobs. But I can still see the value in that, right? You can also have values that are directly contradictory to your kind of those morals that you find valuable. An example might be that, you know, when I was in the Army, I was an engineer. Things that are engineered to a state of certain kinds of perfection are things that I find really beautiful. So if I look at, say, a Lamborghini Gallardo, I can see like a piece of engineering marvel. It's just an absolutely beautiful machine, right? But I'm also an environmentalist, and I know that that V12 engine that it's currently carrying spits out more carbon dioxide than any 20 cars that are currently on the road. So ethically, I think that the Lamborghini Gallardo is a bad thing, but I find it beautiful and amazing, and you know, have many times dreamed of having one, or at least driving one, right? So I have a value for this vehicle, but I also have a moral that says that this is a harmful artifact, if you will, this aspect. So you can value lots and lots and lots of things. The thing that's important about value, that concept for ethics and morals, is that you have to value something in order for it to be moral. If you don't value it, it's no longer a moral, and now it's a rule or a law, right? So if you have a moral that you find just utterly distasteful, that you hate it, it's the worst thing in the world, but you think that, you know, it's necessary or whatever, you absolutely hate it, that means that it's like you're not following that moral because you want to. You're following that moral because there's some underlying drive that's pushing you towards that, which is by definition what a rule is, right? So rules are not ethics. Rules are not morals. If I ever use the term rule in this class, I am not talking about those kinds of things. I'm not talking about rules such as, or as such, things that you don't want to follow. Which leads me to the culmination of the class and the last thing that I'm going to talk about tonight, since we're now a full 20 minutes over, and I appreciate you all hanging out. I cannot in any way, and neither can anybody else in this world, nobody can make you ethical. There's nothing I'm going to say in the next 16 weeks that can make you do anything that you don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm providing you are tools for being a good person. You have to want it. You have to want to be a good person. Then the tools become valuable. If I hand someone who doesn't want to build anything a hammer, they're going to look at me like I'm an idiot. Same case. I can spew this stuff for days. And if you don't want it, if you want to keep being dirty and doing whatever the hell you want, nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do. That is really important for when we're talking about this stuff, because there's going to be times where I might say something and you're like, what person would do that? Why would they want to do that? Why would you can't tell me to do that. I'm not going to do that. Okay, I can't make you do that. I can't even tell you to do it. What I can do is I can provide reasons for why it's good. I can provide reasons for why it will improve your life and the life of everyone around you. I can give you reasons for any number of things. But if you don't want it, then those reasons are probably going to bounce right off your skull. They're not going to have any value for you, right? Mm-hmm. To say that studying ethics requires an open mind is just kind of stupid simple, right? Of course it requires an open mind. But it requires more than that too. It requires a want, a desire to be a good person. If you want to be a good person, then these are all things that you can take. You can kind of load up into your toolbox, right? And make decisions about your life on whether you're going to use some of these or not, if they are valuable enough to you to implement. If nothing else, one of the things that studying ethics really does, and has, even for people who don't necessarily want to be ethical, what it does do is it opens your eyes to the idea that you can have 5 people in a room, all who think that what they are doing or saying is good, and it all have very different appearances, like sometimes even being like contradictory, right? So it's really important to kind of be able to take these as perceptions, as points of view. And that person that's talking on the television right now and is saying crap that you just don't agree with at all, well, if they're thinking about this from this direction, I can kind of see why they would get to that point, right? You listen to your moms or something like that, telling you not to do a thing that you want to do, and it doesn't make any sense not to do it. Being able to kind of take a step back and say, why? Why does she think that this thing is so important? Not only important, but good. Having some of these perspectives really helps with that. Because, we got 16 weeks, of which we'll spend a couple of weeks on some of these kinds of concepts, normativity and meta and applied. We'll do a little bit of work on some other kinds of, so we'll talk about some morals in later weeks after we've talked about some systems. We'll talk about some morals, some meta-ethic, some meta-ethical tools, if you will. So we'll look at those, but in the grand scheme of things, what we're doing is we're going to go through systematically looking at points of view. If you want to be a good person, here's a point of view you can take. Here's another one. Here's another one. And here's some more. And here's a few more. Lots of different perspectives that you can take. Lots of points of view that lead you toward being a good person, at least in a consistent sort of way. If you've got 16 ways that you can be a good person, then that means that you can have 16 people in a room that might disagree on how to get there, right? Yeah. So it's an important thing to have that that tidbit of knowledge to know that not everybody is going to think the same way about how to achieve a good life. That includes me, because I have my ideas. I think I've got a pretty good handle on what it means to live a good life. And I might even do a little steering from time to time without even knowing it. But it still falls to you. It still falls to you to critically think, to evaluate, to decide if that perspective is something that works for you, works for your life, works for your particular moral set, and then choose whether you're going to try to implement it or not. So we'll close it off there. That is plenty to get everyone started. Lots of things to think about. 2.5 hour initial lecture isn't too bad. It means that our follow-up lecture next week will be quite a bit shorter. But if there are any questions, this is as much for people who are going to watch the recording as those of you that are here now. If you have any questions, get in touch as soon as possible. Do not wait till Sunday to do your bibliography, because that's a lot of reading to try to do in one day. And if you start after 8 o'clock, you're not going to do it. It's just not going to happen. There's too much information to absorb in too short a time. Start early, start often. Do your discussions, do your best, be conversational. Okay, any final thoughts?
No, sure.
All right, I really appreciate those of you that jumped in. I appreciate it. I hope to see your shining faces next time that we meet. Because, you know, I'm pretty, but I have to see this mug all the time. All the time. So I'd like to see all the pretty, not just my pretty.
All the pretty.
Yep. So next week, hope to see everybody, 6:30. Have a great one. Good night.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.